Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 64, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. I am a couple of weeks into my new routine, and I will be honest, I don't like it. I thought that I would drop back to a podcast episode every other week and have a newsletter for subscribers on the off weeks when I wasn't recording a podcast. And I know I haven't given that much of an opportunity to be field tested, as it were, because most of you probably don't know that I have a newsletter, because I didn't make a big announcement or tell you how you could sign up for it. But I can already tell that I'm not going to like this new routine. So if you have strong feelings one way or the other, would you please let me know? Mostly I'm finding that it's too easy to forget about recording the podcast or editing recorded episodes when I have 2 weeks between episodes, and perhaps some of that is my own fault for not being a little bit more organized, but I'm pretty organized. And part of it too, I think, is I just miss talking to all of you. I've developed this audience and you all feel to me like friends that I can chat about sewing with, and I miss that. So I may give it another month, but I may go back to the original podcast schedule of a 30-ish minute episode every week. I suspect that fewer episodes may end up being slightly longer episodes. So if you have strong feelings one way or the other, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm just making educated guesses. So there is a newsletter. You can go to the website at www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. If you go up to the upper left-hand corner and click on the menu, there's a drop-down menu. There's a heading for newsletters. You can go there and read the last issue and decide if you want to subscribe. And if you go back to the homepage, at the bottom of the homepage is a place for you to sign up to receive the newsletter. I will not ever share or sell your contact information, so the only thing you should be getting from me is the newsletter, and you have to opt into that. Let's talk about what I've been sewing. I've mostly been making class samples. I'm teaching the wool and wax tote pattern by Noodlehead at our local quilt store next month on February 21st. And I needed to make up some class samples for that class. I have a wool and wax tote that I made probably 5 or 6 years ago. I made it using the A.L. Francis Textiles waxed canvas. You can get that on Etsy. But the store asked for a class sample that used more current fabrics. And they have a lot of wool embroidery supplies. And the store had some yard lengths of really, really nice wool. So I took one of those chunks of wool and I combined it with the waxed canvas that the store is now carrying. And I made a wool and wax tote, literally wool and wax, with the red wool and the brown waxed canvas. I also made a wool and wax tote using the wool that I made my coat from in October when I took my coat class at the Sewing and Design School in Tacoma. I had some leftover gray waxed canvas from the Kanoko tote, so I combined that with the gray and teal plaid wool fabric, and that made a very cool wool and wax tote. I like that one a lot. I'm also teaching a series of ruler work classes starting next week at our local class, or at our local quilt store, and I needed some class samples for that class as well. So the first class is going to be on straight line ruler quilting. So I made up a sampler on a piece of Kona, some light colored Kona, just so I could demonstrate different quilting patterns that can be done with a straight ruler. But I also had the brilliant idea to get a cheater print from the quilt store, and I used the straight line ruler to quilt around the motifs in the cheater print. So I did that for the quilt store here, and I also did a set for the quilt store in Missoula because I will be teaching ruler classes down there as well too. So Angela Walters has a new video series on quilting swirls, and I had it on the other day while I was working. So I had to make myself a quilt sandwich and come down to the Q20, it's in my office here, and sit down and do some swirl quilting. So that was a lot of fun. That's really low pressure. And again, I just made another quilt sandwich with some Kona and just practiced my swirls. And the thing about free motion quilting is it's a lot like playing the piano. You actually have to do it to develop the muscle memory. Theory is all well and good, but you have to put it into practice. So I like to do that occasionally, and I do it in a low stress way. I'm not doing it on a quilt. I'm just doing it on some practice sandwiches, and that way if I mess up, I can just move on and try to do better. So those are the things that I've been working on. I love this time of year. I know people think that January lasts forever, but January is one of my favorite months. The holidays are over. I don't need to be outside if I don't want to be. And this is the time of year when I have the most sewing time. So I'm taking advantage of it. I'm staying home, I'm being cozy, and I'm working on some sewing projects. Today's guest is someone who was recommended by one of you, one of my podcast listeners, emailed me and suggested Yvette as a possible podcast guest. Yvette is the owner of Stash Hub, and she and I sat down about 10 days ago for a lovely conversation about our stashes and about their app, Stash Hub, which is designed to help you fall in love with your stash. Stashes are one of those topics that can polarize people, and I wish it wouldn't because we're all different and we all have different approaches to our sewing. I have a very robust stash. That's how I like to describe it. It's a very robust stash because I live in the winter. It's a 40-minute drive to town, to the nearest Joann Fabrics, Hobby Lobby, or independent quilt store. And sometimes I will get a wild hair to do a project, and I want to be able to go to my stash and pull out exactly the right fabric. I don't want to have to wait until the store opens and then hope I can find what I need. I like to be able to go to my bins of fabric and look through, and usually I can find what I'm looking for. Other people may find that much fabric to be overwhelming, and that's fine. If you're the type of person that only buys fabric when you have a project in mind, I admire your discipline, and I think that that's a great approach to take. But if you're like me and you have a very robust stash, I don't want you to be ashamed of it. As long as you're not spending money that you don't have, I think however much fabric you have is your business and nobody else's. So my guest today is Yvette of Stash Hub, and we're going to talk about the app that she and her husband created for cataloging and curating your stash. So welcome to the podcast.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Janet. I'm really excited.
Yes, one of my podcast listeners recommended you, so this is exciting for me too. I've had a little bit of time to poke around your app, and I can see why you wanted to develop something like that because it really does fill a need. I'm gonna start out by asking you how you learned to sew, and you've got a really fun story about how you learned to sew. So could you share that with our listeners?
Yeah, so I originally learned to sew because of rats. So that's the very short version. That tells you nothing. So yeah, basically I bought my first sewing machine in 2019 because I wanted to make some fleece hammocks for our pet rats that we had at the time, to go in their cage. So yeah, I had done some sewing at school. So in the UK, or at least when I was at school, they did design technology, and textiles was a module in that. So I learned the basics of sewing. So I already knew like how to thread a sewing machine and that sort of thing, but I didn't enjoy the textile lessons at school. Let's say that they weren't particularly inspiring. I thought the teacher was really mean, and the projects were really dreadful. Yeah, they were just really, because I think the school didn't have a lot of like money to buy fabrics. So we had quite small bits of fabric, and therefore we made quite small projects. So one of the projects that I remember making was a jacket for my water bottle. And the whole time I was making it, I was just like, why am I doing this? This is terrible. I don't want this. It's not useful. It's really, really fiddly to make. And then I remember just getting home and throwing it in the bin. And I was just like, what's the point of this? I don't want to learn to sew. I don't need any more jackets for my water bottles. And I just found it really not inspiring at all. So yeah, I think my sort of 14, 13-year-old self would be extremely surprised if I told her now that I sew all my own clothes and that I run a business in the sewing community. They'd be like, sewing? What?
So when you made these hammocks for your rats, you were doing this all on your own? You didn't have any classes or anything to help you?
No, it was kind of just like really crazy. So we had the rats, and I wanted to get some nice hammocks, and I was looking on Etsy at sort of handmade ones, and I was like, these are really expensive. At the time, obviously, I didn't know that hand making stuff is really expensive. But I was like, these are really expensive. They look really simple. Like, I could do this. Like, this isn't a big deal. So we have like a sort of big box craft store in walking distance from where we live. So my husband was like, okay, let's just go to the shop and have a look at sewing machines and, you know, get what you want. Like, just one weekend, I was just like, I'd like to make the rats a hammock. And he was like, okay, let's do it. So yeah, it really just started there, like on a crazy whim. And I found online there was like a sort of PDF of loads of, I wouldn't say patterns, but like instructions of how to make things for rat hammocks. So, you know, rat hammocks and little beds and all different types of stuff like that. So I discovered that, which was really useful. And I made a few different things. And rats are the best first customers as a beginner sewist, because if your stuff turns out rubbish, which obviously mine did with basically no sewing experience, the rats don't care. In fact, they love making extra holes in things. So if there's already a hole, they're like, excellent, thanks. That gives me a starting point. So yeah, that was great. There was no pressure. And yeah, I just got into it from there, really. Like, so in 2019, I had my sewing machine. I'd done the rat things and was like, what else could I use this for? So then I was doing other sort of, you know, the simple projects that you do, like tote bags and cushion covers and this sort of thing. And then at the start of 2020, I thought, you know, I could sew a cushion cover. Why can't I sew clothes? Like, it's the same process, right? So I bought a book from Tilly and the Buttons, which I'm sure a lot of the community will know, is a great sort of entry level sewing patterns and instructions. So I bought that book, kind of, yeah, worked through it, got really into the like sewing community online on Instagram. So I'm sure we'll talk a bit about that a bit later on. But yeah, I got really into like the sewing community and got like really, really hyped for it. So then I was making my first pair of trousers, which was a Sophia trousers. They're kind of like a floaty, wide leg, kind of pajama bottomy trouser. They're a very simple project. And I managed to sew through my finger. So I feel like that would have been enough to put me off. But because I'd got so invested already in like the sewing community, like I'd bought a ticket to go to a show, like an exhibition type show. You know, I was listening to all these podcasts, I was following people on Instagram. I was like, I can't give up now. Like I was like on the cusp, you know, and I was like, I can't quit this now. So, you know, I'm there, my finger in the emergency room, like, I'm not giving up this easily.
Did they ask you what happened?
It was ridiculous. So we have this thing in the UK called 111. So if you have an injury but you don't know what to do, you call this number 111, and like a nurse or someone will advise you if you need to go to the emergency room or see a doctor, or if you deal with it yourself. But they have like a script of questions that they ask you, and they're not all relevant. So, they're like, oh, is this a home piercing gone wrong? And I'm like, no, I've just told you I was trying to use a sewing machine. And so they don't, they have to follow the script. So they're like, yes or no, is this a home piercing? And you're just like, oh. And yeah, it was really ridiculous. Anyway, I was there for ages. Eventually they had to do an x-ray and everything, but it was fine. It was just a bit dramatic, And then like the next week it was COVID-19. So then I was stuck at home all the time, and that was quite a good opportunity to, really get my teeth into sewing. So yeah, it kind of all went from there really. And then as I was sort of getting more and more into sewing, and then more and more into buying fabric, as you do, my husband, at the same time as I was teaching myself sewing, he was teaching himself software development. So he was like, in the same way as with sewing, having a project to work on is a much more interesting way to learn new skills than just, I'm going to do zips for a week, and now I'm going to do corners for a week or whatever. He's like, I want to make something to test my coding skills. And he was like, he's very practical. So he likes finding a problem and then solving that problem. So he was sort of looking around, like, what problems are there to solve? And he's like, well, there's fabric there and there, and maybe this fabric's a problem. Yeah, maybe I could do you an app for that. So then we had to think about it, and yeah, it kind of went from there really. So it was literally a need for us that then sort of turned out to be, kind of more prevalent in the wider sewing community. And it's all kind of grown out from there, really.
Did you find that it was helpful to get feedback from the online sewing community when you started this project?
Definitely, yeah. So we officially launched Stash Hub in like November. Was it November? Or was it October? I think it was October 2022 is when we like officially launched it. But for a few months before that, we'd had a beta test where people could download the app and try it out and give us feedback. And this was, the app was, it worked, but it was kind of bare bones. So we were like, let us know what you think, and we'll see what we can do, type thing. So yeah, I mean, having the feedback has been absolutely invaluable. We still welcome feedback all the time. Like, one of the things that was the first piece of feedback, so when we first released the beta test of the app, we thought, well, people are going to download the app and then they'll want to catalog their fabrics, catalog their patterns, and then maybe later on when they put stuff in, they'll want to do their projects. But the feedback was like, oh, well, what about projects? Are you going to put projects in the app? Like, straight away, that was the feedback. And we thought, oh, that's really interesting that, people have started this cataloging process and felt instantly inspired, and then they need somewhere to record that project. So we moved the project section of Stash Hub like up the list, and we were like, we have to do this now, because obviously that's what's really important to people. So we still try and do that a lot now. Like, we still have quite a lot of things on our roadmap to refine and improve the app even more, and we kind of try and pay attention to what people are saying to just decide the priority of those things, because obviously that we're a two-person team, but Doug does all the coding, so there's only so much that he can do. So we really try and like prioritize those things that are going to make the biggest difference to the sewing community.
So when someone starts out with Stash Hub, where do they usually go? Is it to the fabric section to start cataloging their fabric?
It really depends on the person. I've found it like depends what their needs are. And this is something that I found really, really interesting, like in the last couple of years when we've been running the business, is that stashes are very personal, and like so everyone's stash is different. Everyone's like needs are different as well. So like some people, they have loads of fabric, but they know what it all is. They've got it organized in such a way they know what it is, where it is. That's not a big problem for them. But maybe they're a sort of person who's got loads and loads of PDF patterns and they're all just in their email inbox and they don't know what they've got or something like that. So some people will start with patterns because then they've got, when it's in the app, you can just browse it much more easily, see what you've got. And different people are inspired in different ways as well. Some people are like fabric first. They'll see the fabric and think, oh, what can I make for this? Whereas other people are pattern first and they'll think, I need this in my wardrobe. Let's go out and find a fabric. So yeah, it's really variable whether people will do like all fabrics first, all patterns first, start with notions because that maybe that's the most chaotic bit of their stash, or they just go straight in with projects and think, well, this is my make nine. I want to do these this year. I'll put them in the app. So then I've got the record of my ideas. So yeah, it is really variable and it's really interesting to hear from people like what their approach is, because that's something, obviously the app was made for me, but not everyone is me. So trying to think about everyone else's sort of preferences and experiences is really interesting and has really helped us like develop the app into something really good as well.
I know that you have a couple of levels. So there's a free version of the app, but you also have a subscription version.
Yes. So the free version of the app, you can kind of think of it as like a free trial almost. So you can use almost all the features of the app, but it's limited to add like 20 fabrics and 20 patterns. So it's really good for beginners as well. Like if you just started buying fabric, you probably don't want to pay out on an app to organize it when you actually don't have very much. So we've made it free so that people can try it out, see if it works for them as well, because obviously different people respond better to different systems. And then there is a subscription, so you can subscribe either monthly or yearly, and that gives you unlimited scope to add as much as you want to. And we've also got this feature called Magic Input, which pulls all the information out of a web listing online. So you can use that unlimited times as well. So that will save you a lot of time. So yeah, it's our full-time business now for both of us. We both work full-time on Stash Hub, and yeah, we don't have any ads in the app either. So yeah, we're really grateful to everyone that subscribes to Stash Hub, and we're just so glad that people are finding it valuable. Yeah, so last year I took the big step to like leave my quote unquote regular job to work on Stash Hub full time. So that was quite scary and quite quite a big leap, but it's been really good fun, and it just means that I've got more time to spend in the sewing community, which is amazing.
That's exciting. I played
Yeah, I love
around a
it.
little bit with Magic Input and that was a lot of fun. I was trying to describe it to my husband and I said I went to the website where I bought the fabric and I copied the URL and I put it in Magic Input and it pulled all of the information over. So that was
Yeah,
really
that's
exciting. Yeah.
definitely probably the most genius part of the app. And I think that's one of the reasons as well why a lot of people like to start with patterns, because most it's easier to find listings for the patterns. If the pattern's still on sale, you'll be able to find it online and use it in Magic Input. Whereas with the fabrics, if you've had a fabric for years and years, it might not be available anymore. So then you'd have to like enter the details manually. But we do tell people as well, like you don't have to fill in all the fields. You just fill in what's useful to you. But yeah, I know there can be kind of a completionist mentality, because obviously if you sew, you've got to sew your project to the end. Otherwise it's like a whip that's just hanging over you forever. So you kind of have to have that attitude to an extent. But then if you're like trying to fill in every single box and you actually don't care what's in the box, I can definitely see the app like becoming a chore for people. So we just try and like, remind people like just start slow, like just put in a few things to start with, only fill in the info that's useful to you. Like if you only care about, the length, the width, and then like the color, so you can filter by the color, then like just do that. Like don't worry about, the weight and all this sort of stuff. Like if you don't know it, it doesn't matter.
So it's very customizable.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that we want to do this year as well, is to like make it even more customizable, like so you can actually like remove fields that you're never going to use and set defaults as well, like let's say you always sew just for yourself. You can just, when you create a project, the person that's linked to that project is always you by default, and then you can change it if you sew the odd thing for someone else, that sort of thing. So we're going to try and make it even more sort of customizable and convenient for people as well, because we think that's really important.
I want to switch gears a little bit here. You and I talked a bit before we started recording about you don't want people to have shame about their stashes. And I totally get that because it seems more and more these days. I follow a couple of Twitter accounts that are fairly critical of fast fashion. And by extension, sometimes that gets pushed onto sewists. Somebody that I follow on YouTube said she made 148 garments last year because she has a YouTube channel. And she said, I got a lot of pushback from people who said, you don't need 148 garments. And so there's some overlap there I see between the fast fashion and fast sewing. And maybe we could talk a little bit about not being embarrassed about the size of your stash. I have a fairly large stash, but I'll tell you, I went to pull out some fabric for a project the other day and I opened up one of the bins and I thought, this is like shopping in my own personalized fabric store. These are the colors I like, these are the fabrics I like. So I think it is important to curate your own fabric stash.
Yeah, definitely. So this is one of the things that we're really passionate about with Stash Hub. Like we've even named, the word stash is even in the business. We're trying to like reclaim the stash and like make it something amazing. 'Cause I think everyone loves buying fabric, right? Like you see a thing, it really inspires you, you get that warm feeling inside, you're like buying this, gotta have it. But then I think when you get something and then it becomes, part of the stash, this big, I don't know, conglomeration of stuff, the whole stash can become this overwhelming concept, and people then they don't want to face it, and they're like, oh, the stash, or there's also all these sort of feelings of like shame and guilt over the stash, and there's a lot of talk in the community about it as well, or even just like jokes, but they sort of shame the stash in the context of the joke. So I think it's important that people are mindful of their stash in terms of the sort of overconsumption and fast fashion aspects of it. Like, yeah, definitely only buy things if you really want them. Don't buy things just because they're on sale and stuff like that. But I think if you buy something, if it brings you joy, then you should own that, and you should be really like grateful that you've got that opportunity to have that collection like in your sewing space. You shouldn't feel like you shouldn't have it, like just because maybe it's bigger than somebody else's, or it's I don't know, someone who doesn't sew says, why do you have so much fabric? Like it's not about them. Like this is your personal stash, and what works for you, it's not going to work for someone else. Some people, they get inspired by having no stash, and then they want to do a project, they buy the stuff, they do the project, and they find it overwhelming having stuff at home. Great, that's fine. That's their method. But other people, they like to have, like you say, a sort of personal shop almost, that they can browse. They know everything's their style, their colors. They know they like it all. And then whenever they want, they can pull out something and make a project that they know they're going to love. And it's different for different people. And I think that's something that people often sort of don't appreciate, and that's how sometimes like the online space can get kind of conflict, because people assume that everyone thinks and acts the same way as they do, and it's never the case.
So where do you see Stash Hub going in the future? I know you talked a little bit about making it more customizable. Do you have other ideas? Do you have big dreams?
Yeah, so this year I think we really just want to sort of spread the word about Stash Hub more, get more people on board with it. I think there are already like a lot of people that have heard of Stash Hub, and they think, oh, I'll get round to this someday. Like we want to convince people like you don't have to do it all now. You can just like get started. And I think once people get into it, it's really encouraging for making things. So one of the things we've done is when you check off a project as complete, there's a little confetti and it's like, this is your first project complete, and it gives you some little stats about it. And like we just really wanted to capture that satisfaction of, completing a project. So we've put that in. Something we want to add quite early this year is like achievements as well, to really encourage people to, get in touch with their stash, get making, get inspired. So there's all different type, like parts of the app now as well. So we've got like challenges as well. So we just really want to help people discover things that are going to inspire their sewing and get them feeling motivated. So this year we kind of want to help get the word out a bit more, get more people aware of Stash Hub, but also using Stash Hub in a way that works for them. And then, going even further forwards, we'd love to expand it to other crafts as well. So I know that you were a knitting designer previously. So do you also do a lot of knitting as
I
well now?
I
You
don't
come
do as
away from
much
it.
knitting as I do sewing. Knitting takes a lot longer, and
Yeah, you
I've
haven't
rather fallen in love with the instant gratification part of sewing.
you haven't got that project complete confetti inside you like as
No.
much with knitting. But like we know there's a lot of crossover in, crafting, that a lot of people who sew will also knit or do paper craft or other things. So we want to try and expand the app to cover different crafts. But we're just really aware that we want to make it as good as we can for sewing first. So we're really focusing on that at the moment. And then in the future, we'd like to expand out to different crafts. So that's sort of our long-term plan. But we've got lots of exciting stuff coming up this year. We're hoping to do our first sewing exhibition show in March this year. So that'll be really interesting to see how that goes, because it's kind of a different type of thing to sell compared to a lot of companies that are just selling fabric. So it's like, it's right there, you see it, it's pretty, you buy it. Whereas we're sort of selling a concept of like, get organized, fall in love with your stash. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. um
But it almost sounds as though you haven't just created an app, you're creating a community.
Yeah, and that's really important to me, obviously, from what I talked about before with my immediate sewing injury when I first started dressmaking, and the having that support of the community, like really, really helped me get into it. And like all the joy that I've had since then from sewing and buying fabric and the community, everything, I just wouldn't have had that if I hadn't, felt accepted and encouraged by the community. So I really want to continue to give back to that community. So that's why I really try and, support challenges that are happening in the online community, join podcasts, discover more people in the community, YouTube, like everything that's going on. Just really, I love supporting that because it spreads the inspiration and helps more people get into sewing as well. So and I also this year would love to do more kind of content about like helping people get organized as well. Like, this is how I organize my fabric. This is a way that you can store fabric in this kind of container, that sort of thing. Just to help inspire people if they're feeling a bit stuck. Because I think getting started is the hardest part with anything, not just with getting organized.
Can you talk a little bit about the challenges? You do monthly challenges, am I correct?
Yeah, so in every month, I'll share like a roundup of the challenges that are happening in the community. So I don't host the challenges, they're sort of hosted by creators and businesses, mostly on Instagram, sometimes like on YouTube. And it's really amazing. Like they're all kind of run on like a voluntary basis. The challenge usually has like a theme. So, and the theme can go for like a month or like a year. And there's those different ones. So there's sort of stash busting challenges. There's a challenge called the Last Sewer Standing, which is like a really extreme no buy challenge. I don't know if you've heard of this one. But so there's it basically, if you want to achieve something in your sewing goal, like check out sewing challenges because there's a lot going on. And there's ones that are really good for like charity as well. So like Project Dress a Girl, which is run by Mary Sews, that's amazing. So you basically just make dresses that get donated to little girls in extreme poverty. So it's just a really good way of like using your sewing skills for a cause, or just so I host a challenge called So Fruity. So that's not for a cause at all. That's just silly and for fun, but you just use a fabric with a fruit print on or a fruity color or do something like that. So it's just to get people inspired, really. So yeah, they're organized by different people each month, but I try and get a roundup because they can be a bit difficult to find, especially if you're not like spending as much time on Instagram as I am. If you're not following the right people, you might miss it and stuff. So yeah, I put all the challenges in the app, and then you can link them to your sewing project plans as well, so you don't forget to join in, because often they will sort of align with something that you already want to make. So for example, in January, there's a challenge called January to help you make jeans. So if people have already got jeans on their 2025 plans, you could join in with that. And then you already wanted to make it, and then you can join in the challenge, you might make a new friend, you might win a prize. So yeah, it's really good fun.
So if somebody wants to get started with Stash Hub, where can they go? I actually downloaded the version onto my desktop because I'm older than you and my eyes aren't quite as good as they used to be, so I try to stay off my phone. But I know you have a desktop version and a mobile version as well, correct?
Yeah, so if you want the app, you can find it in the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Just search for Stash Hub, or you can go to our website, which is stashhubapp.com, and there's a link there to the web version. And also if you use different devices, you can just log in with your same account, like on your computer, on your phone. So, if you prefer to do what you're uploading on your computer with your keyboard, then you can do that at home, but then you can still have it on your phone. Like if you're out at the fabric shop and you think, oh, how much fabric do I need for this pattern? You can check it on your phone. So yeah, that's really handy. So yeah, all the info really is on our website, but I also share a lot on Instagram, which is at stash_hub. So yeah, there's a real mix of stuff on there, like silly memes and the challenge roundups, and also bits about how to use Stash Hub and why you need Stash Hub and all sorts of things. There's even a post about how Doug was the employee of the year last year. Missed out on that one.
I have to ask, does your husband sew? Did he learn to sew?
He doesn't sew. He says he's very much more happy doing the coding than the sewing. But last year, when it was our second anniversary, one of the things that we did to celebrate was we live streamed him sewing his own shirt. So he chose the pattern and the fabric and everything, and everyone was like, "Oh, a button-up shirt, that's a bit ambitious for a beginner." And then he was like, "Oh, I don't know if I should be scared or not." So yeah, we live streamed that, and the recordings are all on our YouTube channel, which is also at stash_hub if you want to see how Doug got on with his shirt. But yeah, spoiler alert, it did go well. We eventually finished it, and it is wearable. So yeah, I was really proud of him for doing that. But I'm also secretly glad that he hasn't got really into it, because then I'd have to like share my sewing space. So yeah.
It's true.
Well,
Did he get confetti?
he did, yeah. He got his first project complete. Yeah, so I made, got to set up all of his fabric and everything in the app, because obviously he codes it, but he doesn't, get to use it that much where he doesn't sew. So he was like, "This is really exciting." I'm like, "I told you." Everyone loves the project complete animation.
That's wonderful. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you want to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I just want to, yeah, thank you for having me, and remind everyone to fall in love with their stashes. Like, you loved every fabric when you bought it, so you can love your fabric as a whole. And if there's pieces that are holding you back, you can let them go. It's fine.
That's wonderful. Wonderful advice. Well, thank you. I appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Janet. It's been really good fun to talk to you.
I hope you'll check out Stash Hub. It's a very useful app, no matter what size your stash is. And I'll have links to all of the relevant information on the show notes page on the website. And here's the part of the podcast where I ask you to, if you're enjoying the podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever podcatcher you're using and give us a review or a rating. It really does help other people to find the podcast. The podcast website is www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. My website is www.janetzabo.com with links to my Big Sky Knitting Designs website and my blog. If you go to the Straight Stitch Podcast website, you can read last week's newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter. You can leave a comment on the show notes page. You can poke around and see what else you can find there. I always enjoy hearing from people, and hearing from you and hearing about what you're looking for in the podcast really does help me decide how to go forward. So until our next episode, I hope you have a great week, a great couple of weeks, and that you get to go sew something.